Public Policy. 9.1 Fiscal Policy. The second part of this video, this chapter is 9.2 Monetary Policy. Types of public policy, we have two: fiscal policy and monetary policy. Government fiscal policy means governments make deliberate changes in TAC, which is T, and G, government spending or government expenditure, to produce full employment, price stability, and economic growth, or to achieve all macroeconomic objectives, as in the chapter 7. Meanwhile, the monetary policy is the actions taken by Bank Negara Malaysia, a proxy by government, to influence the money supply and credit to stabilize the economy to achieve the same objective: full employment, price stability, and economic growth. Another type of public policy is direct measure. The direct measure is like a maximum price control, minimum price control, as what you learn in chapter equilibrium in microeconomics. The objective is to control inflation and then to reduce unemployment. Government also provide training to the labor force and others. Fiscal policy is a policy to influence the performance of the economy by using G, government expenditure, and T, tax revenue collection, for regulating the aggregate level of economic activities. Okay, in the second part of economics, which is macroeconomics, you always heard about aggregate. Okay, the word aggregate means a general or as a whole. So we will always see the aggregate price, aggregate demand AD, and aggregate supply AS. In microeconomics, okay, you learn about price, demand, and supply for one product, one item. For example, a chair, a car, a table. Okay, so the price for that table, the demand supply for that table. But for macroeconomic, it is an aggregate price, meaning that the price of the whole goods and services. AD, aggregate demand, is the demand for all goods and services, and AS, aggregate supply for the whole thing. Okay, so this is the macroeconomics. We want to see a big picture rather than a small decision made by individual component. Fiscal policy is by changing GNT, as I read the slide just now, to regulate the AD, aggregate demand, and thus will influence the Y, output level, because AD, aggregate demand, also referring to expenditure. AD made by the household is consumption, aggregate demand made by the firm is investment, and aggregate demand by the government is G, government expenditure, and aggregate demand by the foreign sector is export and import. When AD increase, Y will also increase by using expenditure approach. Y here is referring to the GDP or national income. The objective of the government implementing fiscal policy is to maintain the stability of the economy, solve all macroeconomic problems, especially inflation and high unemployment rate, recession, and to reach an efficient economy at full employment. At full employment, there's no inflation or increase in general price level, and there's no unemployment or recession, okay, or minimum unemployment and minimum inflation. So we want to achieve this rate level, which is full employment level. Another objective by the government is to have steady rate of economic growth and stabilize prices and interest rate in the economy. Composition of government expenditure, we have operating expenditure and development expenditure. Operating expenditure includes expenditure for maintaining government services and facilities and its department, includes the payments for emoluments. Emoluments is a salary for the government servant, and then pension and gratuities. Okay, gratuities is the reward or ganjaran pencen. And then debt service charges, aid to state government, subsidies, maintenance, repairs, and supplies to improve the provision of public services. Development expenditure is meant to support government's projects to boost up economic growth. Development expenditure is allocated to social services, for example, education, health, and housing, and the economic sector, for example, trade and industry, agriculture, rural development infrastructure, and the security sector, for example, the replacement of equipment and the development of the army forces and others. How to implement the fiscal policy? Fiscal policy consists of government expenditure G and tax revenue T. There are three types of budget. Deficit budget, where government expenditure G is more than T. surplus budget where G less than T, and balanced budget where G equal to T. For example, the deficit budget where G more than T, government can increase G, which means increase the expenditure and reduce tax collection, reduce the revenue, so the government expend more and receive less. So that's why in government budget it is deficit. For surplus budget, government consume less. So government spending, government expenditure or lesser than tax revenue. So government receive tax revenue collection but spend less. So that's why government budget becomes surplus or positive. Deficit means negative. Balanced budget when government doing government expenditure equal to the revenue received for the tax. Deficit budget is suitable to reduce unemployment, to reduce recession or slow down to achieve economic growth. So that's why G increase. Government expenditure or spending increase and government collect less tax. For example, during MCO season or COVID-19 season, government spend more and more and then give incentive to the businessmen and household by paying less tax or eliminate certain tax. This is to boost up the economy and to reduce unemployment or recession. Surplus budget is used to control the inflation. Inflation, people spend more, so government will reduce government spending, give less bonus or no bonus, for example, and then collect more tax. So the household and the firm has to pay more tax to the government, so they have less money to spend in the economy. This is to reduce the economic growth or reduce inflation. Deficit budget G more than T, government implement the deficit budget especially during the recession or unemployment, high unemployment, where the economy is too slow. So government aim to expand the economy by implementing deficit budget, spend more G and collect less tax. So this is also known as expansionary fiscal policy. While surplus budget, government expend less and collect tax more. They aim to reduce aggregate demand in the economy because economic growth is too high, people have more money. So government want to smaller the economic growth by implementing contractionary fiscal policy. Contraction. This is a diagram of national income equilibrium, the relationship between expenditure on the y-axis and real output in the x-axis. The final value of goods and services produced or all the value added in the production. So that is the national income or GDP by using output approach. So it referring to Y or national income, Y here. Our target is to have a moderate economic growth at the middle here, Y at full employment, or here Y at full employment. Y in expenditure approach is equal to AD, aggregate demand, by household C, by firm I, by government G, and by foreign sector export minus import. This is in a four sectors economic model. But the economic or the real outcome or expenditure is not always at the middle here, at full employment. Sometimes the Y is too high, so Y1 more than YFE, our target. So economic growth is too high, people have more money, aggregate demand increase, okay, consumption by the household, by the firm, by the government increase, which lead to inflationary gap here or here. So government has to implement contractionary fiscal policy to overcome inflation problem. Contractionary fiscal policy, also known as surplus budget, which is government increase tax, reduce G. So tax collection more than government spending. When government collect more tax revenue and spend less on expenditure, the net budget will be under surplus. Surplus budget will narrow down the effect on real output or Y, okay? Since inflation is related to the booming of an economy, therefore, to reduce inflation, economic growth has to be slowed down, okay, by reduce the G government expenditure. Increase tax, so C and I will reduce. This will reduce the aggregate demand and close down the inflationary gap, while the real GDP fall here. But sometimes the Y not dropping and stop until Y full employment. Okay, maybe it will drop less than Y at full employment, or here from Y1 to YFA supposedly, but keep falling until it's too low, and it creates another problem, which is deflationary gap or recession, or unemployment is too high. Why drop? This is slowdown in economic. This is economic growth. Economic growth is too fast, and this is the moderate level of economic growth or national income. Why? How to cure the problem of recession? Government implementing expansionary fiscal policy or deficit budget. Expansionary. Just now when Y is at Y1, government implement contractionary fiscal policy to reduce economic growth, but now during recession, government to expand, increase Y. Government will collect less tax revenue. When tax drops, C will increase, I will increase, G will increase. So there will be a larger positive effect on real output. The real output will increase. Why? Deficit budget is implemented to raise up the economic activities. Since recession is related to the downturn of an economy, therefore to reduce recession, economic growth has to be shoot up. More government expenditure, G, that increase the aggregate demand and close down the deflationary gap while the real GDP increase. This is explanation for the diagram just now. Another diagram to show the fiscal policy that solve the inflation and unemployment problem is a diagram with general price and Y relationship. Just now y-axis is expenditure, but now y-axis is general price level, and this is maintain y at x-axis. So this is AD, okay? Recall back in microeconomic, this is P, this is Q. Y is the output. Output is Q, total production, goods and services. So P, Q, and this is demand, downward sloping, and this is supply, upward sloping. But we just change the diagram into a macroeconomic. So we put aggregate price, AP, or general price. And this is AD, and this is AS. Q is for the total goods and services, or we just put Y, national income or GDP, output approach, Y. At first, AD cross with AS, so this is the equilibrium point at price PO and YO. Let's say at price PO, price is too high, so government want to reduce the price or economic growth by reducing the AD. The component of AD is CIGSM. Government can decrease G, government spending, to reduce AD, and thus will lower the price level. The reverse will happen if were to reduce recession. For example, P1 is recession. Government want to increase the economic growth from P1 to P0. So government will increase G. G increase, AD will increase. C also increase, investment also increase. Another example is by using T, because fiscal policy is G or T or both. So government reduce G or government increase tax. Balanced budget policy still can stimulate economic growth, but increases the real output by the same amount of government expenditure only. This is sources of government revenue. We have tax revenue, non-tax revenue. This is quite famous in essay part. Tax revenue comes from direct tax and indirect tax. Direct tax, where the burden of tax is paid by the person being imposed by tax, for example, taxpayer, and the burden of tax cannot be shifted to other, for example, income tax, profit tax, corporate tax. Indirect tax, where burden of tax is shifted to the third party. For example, when government charge tax to the seller will shift the tax burden to the customer in terms of increase in price. Example of indirect tax is expenditure tax, sales tax, and others. Taxes are the most important source of government revenue. Most of the government revenue comes from tax collection. But apart from that, government also collect revenue in terms of non-tax revenue. For example, the revenue receipts such as licenses, so they pay to the government to get a license, permit, service fee, regulation fee, interest and returns from investment, which is dividend. Okay, if government invest somewhere, so they get the income from investment. And then non-revenue receipt, for example, refunds of overpayment. Okay, and then if government receive grants, aids from other country or from International Monetary Fund, IMF, and then contribution from the federal government. This is for the state government, so they get revenue from the federal government. Structure of taxes, we have progressive tax, proportional tax, and regressive tax. Progressive tax is the tax rate increases as income rise. So this is income and this is tax rate. When income increase, tax rate will also increase. So it is upward positive. Proportional tax rate is constant as income rises. This is proportional. Okay, regardless how much income you receive, okay, the tax rate paid to the government is just the same. Regressive tax is the tax rate decreases as income rises. So it is downward or negative. Example here we have income 1,000 to 4,000 and then total tax. Okay, but you have to refer to the tax rate to determine whether progressive, proportional or regressive. The tax rate is increasing. This is progressive tax. If the tax rate is constant, it is proportional. And if the tax rate reduces, it is regressive tax. Progressive tax, which is the tax rate increases as income rises, falls heavily on people with high income earners. But regressive tax, which is tax rate decreases as income rise, falls relatively more on the poor. Example of progressive tax is personal income tax. The more income you receive, you have to pay more tax. Regressive tax is the sales tax, property tax. Proportional tax is the corporate income tax with a flat rate percentage of tax rate. Another example, the income tax paid by the individual at various income level in a country is shown in the schedule below. Which country is implementing the regressive, proportional, and progressive tax structure? So the income from 10,000 to 20,000, 30,000, and 40,000. So this is country A, the tax amount is 2,000 constant. Please be careful, this is not a proportional, not a constant, because you have to calculate the tax rate so that you can determine. The tax rate is 0.2, 0.1, 0.07, 0.05. So as your income increase, the tax rate reduce, so this is regressive. Country B is proportional, C is progressive, and D is regressive. This is another example. Okay, this is income, this is the income, and this is the tax. After you calculate the tax rate, you can see that when the income increase from 3,000 to 9,000, the tax rate is constant. So it is a proportional, and this one is progressive, and this one the tax rate reduce as more income you receive. So it is regressive tax structure. For ECO415 subject, you don't have to worry much about the tax structure calculation. I just put it here as your additional knowledge. The purpose of taxation, why collect tax revenue? Government collect tax revenue to develop a country, to redistribute the income and close the income gap between the rich and the poor, especially when the tax structure increases as the amount of salary increase. So at least it will smaller the income gap between the rich and the poor. To protect local and infant industry because they need to compete with the foreign company, foreign industry. So government charge high tax rate for the international company. So in relative price of local or infant industry cheaper than the international, this will attract buyer to buy from them. Infant industry is a baby industry, a new setup industry. So they need support from the government or help from the government, especially in terms of the tax. To correct the adverse balance of payment, to solve inflation problem, to improve the unfavorable terms of trade, and to reallocate resources. The next video is 9.2 Monetary Policy. Thank you.